Hello, my name is Rich Nolan from Nolan Engineering in upstate New York. Today we're going to cover another inspection that I did. We had a call from the client that there was a crack in the ceiling between her dining room and kitchen. She had lived in the house for 3 years, but the crack had gotten much worse recently. Background on the house. The house was a ranch house. The attic was accessed through a hatch in the garage. There was not truss framing, but ceiling joists and roof rafters. Another thing about the house, there appeared to be a wall that was removed sometime in the past between the living room and the dining room. The crack existed between the kitchen and the dining room. The crack extended from the corner of an interior wall to the rear exterior wall of the house. The one noticeable thing about the crack was that the ceiling was actually dropped lower on one side of the crack than the other. The ceiling on the kitchen was only about 12 feet wide, uh, but the other side of the crack was in the dining room where the wall had been removed. So the ceiling joists there were the whole width of the house, about 24 feet. And that ceiling side, the longer span ceiling side, was dropped about an eighth of an inch at the location of the crack. So the attic was inspected, and of course the area over the wall that was removed and the area over the crack was inspected. There were typical ceiling joists, which are 2 by 6, spaced at 16 inches on center, and the roof rafters were in line with the ceiling joists and also spaced at 16 inches on center. What was immediately noticeable was there was a 3-ply 2 by 12 beam laid on top of at the center of the rafters on the center of the house, right where above the wall that was removed. And then they had boxed around those three 2 by 12s and attached them to the side of the ceiling joist. And then, and this is strange, I haven't encountered this before, at both ends of the 3-ply beam that was laying on top of the ceiling joist, they had attempted to hang that beam from the rafters with a threaded rod, a half-inch threaded rod. However, um, the rods were extremely loose, so it was evident that that 3-ply beam was just laying on top of the rafters and actually adding weight to it. So it was not doing anything to hold up the ceiling joist at the center. But in addition to that, they had provided 2 by 4 struts, vertical struts, down from the rafter to the ceiling joist. And this would be about third points. Um, and the struts were actually what was holding up the ceiling joist, not the beam that was laying on top of the ceiling joist in the center and just adding weight. So really it was the struts that were adding or were supporting the ceiling joist, and the 3-ply 2 by 12 was simply adding weight. So it was my opinion that the crack in the ceiling was caused when the roof rafters deflect under a snow load. Because of those vertical struts, the roof was flexing at the center of the rafter where the struts were located and pushing down on the ceiling joists. Those ceiling joists were not designed to hold up the roof rafters. The roof rafters are okay to span the entire width of the house. Let's say the roof rafters span from the exterior wall to the ridge and from the ridge to the exterior wall. They're strong enough, or at least they have been, but they deflect uh, under load, and the maximum point of deflection is the center of the rafter span, which is right where they put those vertical struts. So those vertical struts are actually supporting a considerable amount of roof weight now because they're located right at the center of the rafter, and they will deflect down up to half an inch easy, perhaps even an inch. There was a rather large snowstorm when she noticed that the crack got larger. And the reason the crack was displaced downward on the dining room side, it actually pushed the ceiling down a little bit more, is because the roof system changed in the attic from hip to gable, and there were no struts located above the kitchen. The struts started right over the dining room. So as the roof was loaded up, the dining room ceiling was being pushed down, but the kitchen ceiling had no struts. There was nothing pushing down on them, and the span was only 12 feet. So the cause of the cracking was the roof rafters displacing under load, pushing down on the struts, pushing down on the ceiling. Okay, finally let's talk about if this is a problem or not and some recommendations. Well, the ceiling joists were not designed to support the roof rafters, and the beam that's laid on top of the ceiling joist is doing nothing but adding additional weight. So this should definitely be repaired, and the repair that I would recommend that would probably be the most straightforward and easiest, similar to what they try to do. That beam needs to go. The beam is not long enough. The opening below where the wall was removed is about 14 feet. That a new beam needs to be put on top of the ceiling joist that's sized to support the weight of the ceiling and any attic storage. That new beam needs to be longer, like 15 feet, so that both ends of the beam can go over the interior walls below in the house. And then you have to trace those loads down to the basement, which ends up over the basement beam. So we'll design a beam that's long enough to go over the opening that was made, plus some to go over the interior walls. And then inside those interior walls, we'll make sure there's a sufficient post, probably three 2x4s, and they'll be from the bottom of the beam to the beam in the basement. And then we'll make sure that wherever that lands on the beam in the basement, that the beam in the basement is either strong enough to take that point load, or we'll install another post underneath that location. And of course, in the attic, you'll have to provide some solid blocking between the top of the post and the bottom of the beam. And then you have to hang the floor joist from the beam that's on top, and that can be done by some twisted metal clips that companies make, or similar to what they already have is the 2x4s wrapping around it. We've done this repair several times. Not only a repair, if you want to remove a wall and you don't want to see a drop beam, we call this a raised beam. As long as you can get it in the attic, it's actually fairly simple to do, and it makes a nice repair. And of course, once that beam's in place, those struts have to come out because that's what's pushing down on the ceiling joist. So once we get this beam in and those vertical struts taken out, we can repair the crack. It shouldn't occur anymore because there'll be nothing else pushing down on the ceiling joist. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something and enjoyed.